Hi there, it's Nicole for Lawn Fawn, and today I am showcasing the new Dad Plus Me stamps and dies, as well as the new stitched mountain dies and small cross-stitched rectangles for this great card for Grandpa that would be perfect for Father's Day. I've kind of laid out all the elements that I think I'm going to use and made sure that they're all going to fit inside of my rectangle that I'm using. I'm using the largest size cross-stitched rectangle from the small rectangles set. I'm going to die cut 2 of these rectangles from watercolor cardstock. From one of the rectangles, I'm going to use the new stitched mountain dies and die cut a border to build my background scene. So there are the 2 pieces I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and set my die cutting machine to the side for now and kind of move all of my stamps and things out of the way for a second. And I'm going to take a couple colors of distress ink to color in my mountains. I'm using the Gathered Twigs and Ground Espresso distress inks to start with. Originally, I had just used the 2 brown colors. I am going to pull in a little green here in a little bit. This layer is going to be on top, so I'm definitely going to want to color the whole thing. I like to use a scrap piece of paper to keep my fingers out of the ink so there are no finger marks. Up near the top of the mountains, they're going to be a little bit darker. That's where I'm going to apply the majority of that Ground Espresso ink. I can go back with my Gathered Twigs ink blending tool and blend that color out. I want it to get lighter down near the bottom. Once I have those blended the way I want them to look, I did go back in and add some more dark because I thought I blended it out a little too much. I can go ahead and work on the sky. I'll come back to this here in a little bit. I did spritz that with some water and then blot it dry, so it has a great distressed feel to that border. I thought I maybe lightened it a little too much, so I did go back over it with my Gathered Twigs distress ink just a little bit. The sky is going to be colored with the Stormy Sky distress ink. Nice, great. It really looks like a stormy sky, I think, but I think it works great for a mountain sky as well. Now, I definitely don't have to color the whole thing here because most of it's going to be covered up with that mountain border, so it's just going to be peeking out at the top. Once I have a good blend, I'm going to spritz that with some water from the Distress sprayer and then blot that dry as well. So there's kind of what my 2 layers are going to look like. I'm going to go ahead and ink up the lake with some Stormy Sky distress ink. Now what I decided to do instead, so I could kind of get a 2-tone look, is I'm going to ink it up with Stormy Sky first and then roll on a little chipped sapphire around the edges and then stamp that. Now it definitely doesn't look very good. When you're stamping with distress inks, they typically don't look great with a solid image. What I like to do is go in with a damp paintbrush and paint over that, blending those colors together, blending the ink out for a really smooth, seamless look. Once you have that water there, the distress ink is going to react and work with the water beautifully and smooth out and give you a really pretty stamped image. Definitely has more of that watercolor look and feel to it, which is what I was going for with this card. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of blend that all out. You can definitely tell it's a little darker near the bottom edge where the chipped sapphire ink is. I did take a little additional chipped sapphire ink, press my ink on an acrylic block, and then pick some of that up with my paintbrush. And I'm just kind of drawing some of the designs from the water back in to give it a little more definition. Now the greenery here, I'm stamping with some peeled paint distress ink. Again, it looks pretty good as it is, especially this particular image, but I'm going to smooth it out with a little bit of water on a paintbrush. Just a damp paintbrush. It's definitely, you don't want to have too much water. I typically kind of just dip it into my water, squeeze most of that water out, and then go ahead and paint those in. I used a little scattered straw there. On the other images, I'm going to pull in a little Gathered Twigs distress ink on that yellow for a little bit more of a 2-tone look. The damp paintbrush just smooths that ink out and gives it a much more seamless look, very pretty, like I said, a more watercolored type of look. Here's a little bit of that gathered twigs. I'm just going to pull that into the design, blend that out into the yellow, and it gives it a little bit more dimension than just that one flat color. Once all of these images are completely dry, I'm going to run those through my die cutting machine using the coordinating Dad Plus Me dies. I used a little post-it tape to hold them in place so that they wouldn't shift while I ran them through the die cutting machine. I'll go ahead and remove that post-it tape from those images, pop all of that out, run it through again to die cut some of the grass images, the additional grass images. Next, here's where I am going to apply some of that peeled paint ink to the bottom of this panel to give it a little bit of greenery. It's just going to create a little bit more definition from the mountains to kind of the landscape ground. I'm going to blend that into the gathered twigs ink, so I'm just applying it right over the brown. I don't want it to be super bright, so applying it over the brown is going to give a really nice kind of more natural look. Where those two colors meet, I am going to be covering that up with my little lake, so there's not going to be a ton of blending I need to do there. I did spritz it with some water and then go ahead and blot that dry to continue that distressed look. I am combining a couple of the greetings from the Dad Plus Me stamp set, and I'm going to stamp those with some of the intense black ink from Simon Says Stamp. Now, when I first stamped this, I don't know if I didn't let the paper dry enough from the water or what, but I did not get a very crisp image, and I didn't want to have to redo all of that. Luckily, I was able to line it up and stamp it right over that and get a not much crisper stamped image. A lot of times I don't recommend doing that simply because the chance for error is great, and you may have to redo it anyway, but this time it worked out. I'm going to go ahead and start building my scene. I am attaching everything with some Zotz Bling glue dots. These are my preferred, or this is my preferred adhesive for small little stamped and die cut images, sequins, anything small. The reason is they are teeny tiny. There's no liquid, so they're not going to kind of, squish out from underneath any of the images. It's just really clean and nice. Plus they're super sticky and they're going to adhere really well. I just love them. I think they are a great way to attach anything small. Once I kind of get my lake scene all laid out the way I want it to look, I am going to lay my bears back out. I have not stamped and colored those yet. And then I realized I kind of wanted some of those rocks. So I went ahead and stamped those first with a little ground espresso, blended them out, die cut that and added it to the scene. And then I stamped my bears with the ground espresso, and I am watercoloring those by kind of pulling that color from the stamped line out and blending in some gathered twigs distress ink to color in the bears. This is one of those cards that, although I had a really good general idea of the direction I was going with the design, I kind of built upon it. I built upon the base layer and then the background building scene, and I'm finally getting to the critters. It's a little bit different than how I usually do it. I knew all along I was using these bears, but I just kind of built everything else out first. I have pressed my gathered twigs distress ink to an acrylic block, and I'm picking up the color with a damp paintbrush and kind of blending that color out with that ground espresso stamped line. I've also pressed my ground espresso ink into my acrylic block so that I can pull a little bit more of that color into my bear as I'm watercoloring. It's really going to blend in nicely with the rest of the more watercolory type of imagery in this card. And I built the color up gradually. If you want to lay more color on top of the color you have already laid down and the paper is still wet, I highly recommend drying the paper with a heat tool first before going back over it so that you don't pill your watercolor paper. Once my bear is colored in, I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the smaller bear. I've attached my two little bears to the scene, and then I decided that the grandpa bear needed a hat, so I've stamped that also with the ground espresso ink, and I'm coloring it in with a little barn door ink that's warmed up a little bit with gathered twigs or ground espresso ink. And then the little band around the hat I'm going to color with the chipped sapphire ink. I didn't pull any brand new colors out. I used exactly what was on my desk. Once I've colored in that band and let that completely dry, I will die cut the hat with the coordinating Dad plus Me die. Snip that apart with those snip scissors. Again, these are nested dies and really need to be cut apart with some sort of metal cutters or wire cutters. I'll attach my scene all to the background panel and attach the entire thing to a white top fold card base to finish the card design. Thanks for joining me for the Dad plus Me and Stitched Mountain Dies from Lawn Fawn card. Here are a couple more Lawn Fawn videos you might be interested in. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.